Billions at stake. The political battle over increased spending for the military versus domestic programs. Into the storm. Relatives of crew members ask why a fated cargo ship set sail as Joaquin grew to hurricane strength. Feeding the hungry. Catholic Relief Services aims to end chronic hunger on the African continent. And unedited, undercover, raw footage of the Planned Parenthood videos released to Congress. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, October 7th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. South Carolina faces yet another anxious day of waiting as rivers rise and dams bulge. At least 11 dams have failed since Saturday. Hundreds of National Guard members are dropping sandbags and equipment to repair the dams. Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Charleston is in the thick of the relief effort.
Just a few minutes ago, we received a food truck from the Low Country Food Bank with emergency food for the flood victims. With that, we received some fresh produce and have already been able to send out about 200 bags to various parts of the county to help those that were most affected by the disaster. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham warns the disaster could break the bank of federal emergency funds, possibly topping $1 billion. It will undoubtedly be a long, difficult road to recovery for communities inundated with water this past week. Mark Irons is here with a closer look tonight. Mark?
Ryan, residents of South Carolina devastated by the floods are helping one another to salvage what's left and search for personal items. But for some, it will mean starting from scratch since they've lost everything.
The long road to recovery. Restoration crews throughout Columbia, South Carolina, digging up waterlogged floors after the deadly historic flooding.
I went from water that was probably about 4 inches below my knees to having water at waist level and rising within about 30 seconds.
Ray Stillwell shows us what's left of his home. He says the raging waters from a breached dam nearly swept him away.
I'm lucky to be here. God allowed me to be here. Now I just got to figure out what to do with the extra time I've been given.
Not much is left of the priceless treasures belonging to Polly Sims' mother.
There's no way it'll be what it was.
Her mom was Miss South Carolina in 1954.
Found my mom's Miss South Carolina pageant book. It's soaking, socking wet. Maybe I'll be able to salvage some of it.
Finding something to salvage, a scene playing out throughout the city. Despite the break in the clouds, the governor says residents still need to be cautious amid concerns about other dams breaching.
Very sad. Very sad.
Lena Gann and a handful of co-workers look on helplessly as their vet office remains underwater.
This is who we work for. We're family, and just to see the destruction,
it's just all they've worked for and their livelihood, and you know, we are like a family, so it's just like our home is destroyed.
And so is the dance studio Radniko Pavlovich has built for the past 17 years.
Everything is gone.
Point shoes smudged with mud.
Those on the dance floors.
Now a pile of rubble.
And you think it was a dream, and you're going to wake up and it's going to be a dream. I think reality really kicked in today. I'm speechless. I don't even know what to say.
State officials say it's too early to calculate the economic toll from the flooding, but for the businesses and homeowners, they can see it for themselves.
I mean, everything is everywhere.
President Barack Obama has already signed a disaster declaration ordering federal aid to help recovery efforts in South Carolina. The action makes federal funding available to people in 8 counties. Brian?
Mark Irons, thank you. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. President Obama apologizes to Doctors Without Borders for the deadly U.S. airstrike on that group's medical clinic in Afghanistan. White House spokesman Josh Earnest says the president offers his condolences to the group's staff. He says Obama assures them there will be a thorough and objective accounting of the facts. The White House says the president also spoke with the president of Afghanistan, pledging to keep working closely with the Afghan government. An Oregon police chief says 2 detectives who rushed into the line of fire last week don't want to be called heroes. However, an Oregon district attorney is recognizing them for bravery at Umpqua Community College.
I want everyone to know of the selfless acts of these officers that they made in responding to this scene. They had little regard for their own personal safety, and they saved many, many lives that day with their heroic acts.
The two men were among the first to arrive, jumping out of their car without bulletproof vests. The shooter fired at them, but apparently missed. The officers hit the gunman once before he took his own life. Well, Congress sends a massive $612 billion defense bill to President Obama, who has threatened a veto. It would be just the fifth time that's happened with a defense bill in 50 years. Obama doesn't agree with a separate war-fighting account, padded with $38 billion. Russian warships are in the Caspian Sea. They fire cruise missiles as Syrian government troops launch a ground offensive. It is the first major combined air and ground assault since Moscow began its military campaign in Syria last week. The Russian Air Force also carries out a bombing campaign in support of Syrian President Bashar Assad. Rebels have been advancing there in the past month, but ISIS has no presence in that region. The Coast Guard tonight ends its search for 33 missing crew members of a U.S. cargo ship. The ship sank last week during Hurricane Joaquin. But why did the ship sail into the storm from Jacksonville, Florida? The National Transportation Safety Board is trying to answer that question. People gather for prayer vigils from Florida to Maine as the days stretch on with no word from the 33 crew members aboard the cargo ship El Faro. Their family members ask, why did the El Faro sail and continue to sail as a tropical storm grew into a hurricane as it neared the Bahamas?
I don't think that they should have shipped them out when they knew that was going on. That makes no sense to me at all.
Destiny Sparrow says her father was responsible for steering the ship. Her mom relayed the news. The Coast Guard says the ship sank. Search crews found debris spread across more than 220 square miles.
I drove over to her house and I started crying and was just holding her because it's hard.
Joaquin was still a tropical storm when the boat left Jacksonville, Florida. Tote Services, which owns the El Faro, insists the weather seemed favorable at the time and no reports from the captain seemed alarming until the ship lost its propulsion.
His plan was a sound plan that would have enabled him to clearly pass around the storm with a margin of comfort that was adequate in his professional opinion.
When the ship sailed on Tuesday evening, the storm was nowhere near what it was at the time that the vessel became disabled.
All of that will be part of the investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board.
We will be studying the meteorological conditions and all of the factors that went into the decision-making to sail on that day and to continue sailing.
The NTSB expects that investigation to take at least a week. And a Catholic congressman insists the U.S. has a moral imperative to feed the world's hungry. His comments come during a congressional hearing today on food security in Africa. Catherine Szeltner reports from Capitol Hill tonight. Catherine?
Brian, chronic hunger affects about 8 million people worldwide. Malnutrition alone kills 3 million children each year. Today, nonprofits and lawmakers come together, discussing ways the U.S. can help end world hunger.
Today's hearing, led by Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey, focused on the bipartisan Global Food Security Act. During testimony, Congressman Smith and experts underlined the need for children to get proper nutrition from conception to their second birthday. Panelists say the hungriest people in the world are often farmers. Dr. Carolyn Wu, president of Catholic Relief Services, testified before the panel. She says the U.S. needs to help farmers worldwide.
They are very much at risk. The smallest farmers, if there is a drought, if there is a pest, whatever it is, they lose everything up front. Farmers are very vulnerable, and their productivity is affected by a lot of different things.
Wu says farmers often lack information and even access to the market to sell their produce. The Global Food Security Act has passed the House but not the Senate. The bill would authorize the Feed the Future initiative to combat global poverty.
The Feed the Future initiative includes language like empowering women and gender equality. While that often hints to a contraceptive coverage agenda, CRS maintains there are no red flags. The initiative is strictly a food program. Brian?
Catherine Szeltner on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Catherine. Migrants refused entry into European Union countries could be swiftly sent back home. The 28-nation EU is set to agree to a crackdown on the recent surge of refugees. German Chancellor Angela Merkel tells the European Parliament today Europe can't shut itself off from the rest of the world trying to keep migrants out. French President François Hollande is calling on the European Union to adopt a common asylum policy. But according to a draft statement, EU ministers will agree tomorrow that all measures must be taken to ensure irregular migrants return. Meanwhile, migrants continue their long trek towards Western Europe. Roughly 2,000 arrived in Serbia today through Macedonia. Trains brought them this far, but they had to walk to their next stop to register with police. United Nations workers are doing what they can to help.
The needs are big, so of course we'll not be able to help everyone, but we are doing our best. We have on site here blankets, raincoats, food. There's also medical assistance provided.
The UN says the local community is also providing support for the migrants. Well, today's general audience in St. Peter's Square was the first of 3 to take place during the Synod on the Family. Pope Francis explained his catechesis for this period that bishops from around the world are gathered in Rome. He'll reflect on the indissoluble relationship between the church and family with a view to the common good of the whole Christian community. That theme applies to the Synod itself. After today's small group sessions, Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput reiterated the global nature of this gathering.
Language that might be offensive in Western Europe and North America might be a language that's necessary for clarity in places like Africa and Asia. And so I think this is an international meeting of the Catholic Church, all of us, and it's important for the work of the Synod not to be narrowly focused on concerns that are primarily the concerns of my country, for example. I think we need to deal with those concerns, but that's not the only thing.
Archbishop Chaput was one of several Synod participants briefing the media after today's sessions. Joining us from Rome for an update on the Synod on the Family, Alan Holdren. Alan, what interesting tidbits did you pick up from today's briefing after the Synod meeting?
Well, Brian, right now they're in these small group discussions within the Synod Hall. That means that they're divided up between all of them into 13 groups, divided into different languages and really different cultures. Within those different languages, say English, you've got representatives from 6 continents. So you can imagine that the issues they're talking about, even if they're speaking about the same issue from one place to another, they could have a very different approach to how to reach out to people living a certain problem, say domestic violence in families. They said in the briefing today that that is an experience very different among different cultures.
And of course, Archbishop Chaput, who just hosted the Holy Father at the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia, expressed some concerns that the final report depict family life from a Western perspective or the Western experience. Did he explain that?
Yeah, he invited everyone to look beyond just the Western experience, to look beyond the experience of Europe and the United States in particular, and often to all of the other reaches of the world. He said this is an experience of universality of the Church within the Synod Hall. We can't just be narrow-minded, as the Pope said also yesterday when he addressed the Synod. We can't just focus on certain issues. We've got to focus on all of the issues that take place in all of the different places the Church exists.
Alan, who writes the final report? In what language is it? And how does that determine what the rest of us hear based on translations?
Well, Brian, there's one person that's in charge of this final report. His name is Cardinal Peter Erdo, and he's called the Relator General. So that just means that he's in charge of coming up with that final report. He does have the help of a 9-member commission. So there are 10 people in practice working on that document in Italian. So when it comes out at the end of the Synod, if it's anything like last year, we can't expect there to be a translation immediately. Last year, it came 3 months after the Synod finished.
Very interesting. Alan Holdren with our Synod update from Rome. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Brian.
Planned Parenthood Exposed is the title of a House committee hearing tomorrow. It comes just a week after Planned Parenthood's president testified on Capitol Hill. Jason Calvi has more now from outside the Capitol tonight.
Brian, witnesses will shed light on Planned Parenthood. It's part of the House Judiciary Committee's ongoing investigation. It follows the release of 10 undercover videos.
They would have to have an extra level of consent.
Planned Parenthood has continually challenged the credibility of the recent undercover videos.
Deceptively edited videos. I read all of the transcripts, the full, not these edited sensationalized videos. The outrageous accusations leveled against Planned Parenthood based on heavily doctored videos are offensive and categorically untrue.
But the group behind the videos says they've uploaded the full footage on their YouTube page. Planned Parenthood commissioned a study of the first 4 videos. Their report found no substantive video manipulation, only cuts, skips, missing tape. They say the Center for Medical Progress heavily edited the short videos so as to misrepresent statements. So what was cut out? The filmmakers sent the raw video to investigators for a study commissioned by Alliance Defending Freedom, a Christian law firm.
They concluded no manipulation, these videos are authentic, and those edits, they're only about a few things. Bathroom breaks, commuting, and people standing around in the hallway when no dialogue was taking place.
ADF says it's time for Planned Parenthood to face the facts.
They are a scandal-ridden organization that receives $1.5 million in American tax money every day.
Now the House Oversight Committee will have their chance to look at all this unedited video, which they did subpoena. The National Abortion Federation tried to stop the release, but just yesterday a judge ruled that the videos can be sent to Congress. Brian?
Thank you, Jason Calvi. Coming up, a warning about the consequences of legalizing assisted suicide. And after a visit from Pope Francis and thousands of others, Philadelphia's Mary Undoer of Knott's Grotto closes. Today's Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary was established in the 16th century to thank God for the victory of Christians over the Turks at Lepanto. That victory attributed to the praying of the Rosary. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Americans are warned about the dangerous consequences of legalizing assisted suicide. Disability advocates in California oppose a bill signed by Governor Jerry Brown this week.
People should know that where assisted suicide is legal, some people's lives will be lost without their consent through mistakes and abuse. No safeguards have ever been enacted or even proposed that can prevent that outcome, which can never be undone.
Supporters of the law say they'll continue pushing for similar laws in other states.
We ultimately think that this decision is something that each American should have the right and the opportunity to make for themselves. So we will continue to do this work in the states, but we are also working on the national level.
California is the 5th state to legalize assisted suicide. The others, Oregon, Washington, Vermont, and Montana. We are Skyping with Dr. Pia de Solenni from San Francisco. She is Associate Dean of the Augustine Institute in Orange County, California. Dr. de Solenni, what would you say to supporters of this bill and others like it that are being considered or have passed in other states?
Well, I would say what I would say to Governor Brown, frankly, you've made this about your choice without considering the weakest and the most vulnerable. And this is an option that you want. But, you know, when we looked at the hearings and who was testifying, they were people of means. They were people of higher socioeconomic status. They were not people who are from minority populations. They were not lower income people. And, you know, if we need to be thinking about the common good, not one's individual choice. And I think they've missed the boat when it comes to thinking about the common good.
What can we do as advocates for life to discourage this tragic taking of life, even if it is legal?
You know, as in all things, it begins with our own actions and the way that we treat others. I really encourage people, wherever you can, get involved with volunteering at an assisted living facility, some type of a convalescent home. Spend time visiting the elderly, because those actions speak louder than words. And part of the problem that we can even have this conversation is because so much of that volunteering has dropped off and people don't have a day-to-day contact with the elderly, with the sick. We need that day-to-day contact, and that's really where it begins. All of these are seed, they begin at a seed level, not at a legislative level.
Excellent point. And how do you think we could be more clear that being pro-life goes beyond the debate over abortion to these end-of-life issues?
Well, first of all, by starting with our actions. It's our actions that have to line up with our rhetoric. And then secondly, broadening the conversation and bringing up the people. There are plenty of examples of people who are terminally ill and have refused the quote-unquote right to die, people who want to experience this process with their loved ones. We need to shift the conversation. And as I always say, if we don't jump into the conversation, then we allow the other side to have the conversation for us. We allow them to be our voice. So we have to be ready with our actions and with our words.
Dr. Pia de Solenni joining us from San Francisco by Skype tonight. Thank you. We appreciate it.
It's good to be with you. Thank you.
And the Philadelphia grotto dedicated to Mary, Undoer of Knots, has now officially closed. Pope Francis visited the grotto based on one of his favorite paintings just before the World Meeting of Families closing Mass. People wrote problems on ribbons, leaving them in the grotto, and they were encouraged to remove someone else's knot and pray for them. At today's interfaith closing ceremony, there were prayers of thanks for the struggles and the hopes shared at the knotted grotto. Up next, making sense of the Synod on the Family with author and historian Dr. Matthew Bunsen. And people in Greece get a glimpse into the future of mass transportation. It's Wednesday, so there was a general audience in Rome. This is Pope Francis, who said men and women of today are in need of a robust injection of family spirit. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and we invited Dr. Matthew Bunsen back to analyze the Synod, what's going on. These small groups are taking place now. These are very strong personalities. I would imagine the discussions are very lively.
They are. When you consider who's probably on some of these commissions, we know from previous experience of earlier synods and from tidbits and bits of information that we're getting already from this one. It's very diverse in their opinions, diverse in their personalities, but strong in their personalities. Consider, for example, that among the leaders of these small language groups, you have Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philadelphia, you have Cardinal George Pell of Australia, you have Cardinal Robert Sarah of Africa. Towering figures in their own rights, and I think they're going to have a big hand in shaping some of the deliberations.
But very different leadership styles, and they're elected by their peers, right?
They are. And we also have to remember that the way these groups are broken down, you have 13 language groups into 5 different languages. But let's not think of these as just language blocks. In fact, Archbishop Chaput has commented that on his group, he has members from Bangladesh, Uganda, Canada, and France. So we're seeing a diversity of opinion, a real diversity of experiences, too.
But the way these groups are constructed, then, we're really getting the pulse of the universal church, right?
We are. We are seeing bishops from all over the world, 6 continents, as we heard Alan Holdren talk about earlier. We're seeing as well the concerns of those bishops. So in every language group, for example, you're going to have the concerns of the Asian bishops, you're going to have concerns of the African bishops. No one is being left out in the discussions of these groups.
Would you say the meat of the Synod really lies in this process?
Yes. Over the next weeks, including the next 2 weeks, they're going to be focusing on different topics, but these same language groups are going to be meeting. They're going to be doing the work of working their way through the Instrumentum Laboris, the blueprint for the Synod, and then they'll issue their report.
So each group then issues a report to the full Synod? Is that how it works?
What we're going to end up with basically is 39 reports from the 13 different language groups that are then handed, as we heard Alan talk earlier, they'll be handed over to Cardinal Peter Erdo, the Relator General, and his commission. They then have the great task, difficult task, of synthesizing all of this material into the final report that's given to the Holy Father.
A lot of information. How do you think the Synod has been doing in sort of controlling the flow to the media?
Well, Archbishop Bruno Forte said that he was concerned last time around that there was a kind of bipolar way of the media in dealing with this. What was going on in the Synod was not what they were hearing in the media. We're getting a very different approach this time, much more control, and I think it's working so far.
Dr. Matthew Bunsen, we'll have you back. Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Well, people living in a small Greek town get a sneak peek into the future of mass transit. A driverless bus built in France is tested in traffic for the first time. Let's take a view from the inside of the bus. The tiny City Mobile 2, guided by GPS, lasers, and wireless cameras, hums through the streets of Trikala.
We thought that since this is the experiment and the whole world waits for the results of this project, we have dedicated the downtown. So we have a 2.4 kilometers route, the bus route, and as you can see, it is mixed with traffic, with pedestrians, with bicycles, with cars. That's why Trikala have been selected to be the first city in the world where the buses without drivers can circulate in a downtown environment.
The pilot project of the European Union aims to revolutionize urban public transportation by 2050, ending dependence on oil. Until tomorrow, our EWTN News Nightly team bids you good night. I'm Brian Patrick as we close tonight revisiting today's general audience in St. Peter's Square.